Everyone, and welcome to another episode of Radiant Central, and I'm your host Natasha St. Michael, and thank you so much for joining me. So recently someone asked me about carbohydrates and which carbohydrates do I consider to be healthy. Great question. Well, I think for anyone that's, first of all, that's healthy, that doesn't have any kind of health condition and that doesn't have a weight issue or anything like that, someone that's perfectly healthy, I think any carbohydrate from a whole food source is perfectly healthy. So that's fruits, it's vegetables, starchy vegetables, even things like potatoes or yams, sweet potato, squash, perfectly healthy. Also whole grains, perfectly healthy. Rice is even, I think, is perfectly healthy. Beans and legumes, nuts and seeds, all these things have carbohydrates in them. And I believe that all these things are perfectly healthy. People don't have to be crazy worried about them as long as that person who's consuming them is healthy. But let's say someone has insulin resistance, or they're diabetic, or they're needing to lose weight, or they got some sort of sugar sensitivity, or some issue that they're not able to break down and process carbohydrates like other healthy people are. Then I would say with those people is to be watching the portions. I wouldn't necessarily be cutting out food groups as I would be watching my portions, and perhaps focusing on eating more lower glycemic carbohydrates, or foods that contain carbohydrates but are lower on the carbohydrate end. You know, there's kind of like a big difference between eating a small bowl of raspberries compared to eating a banana, or there's a big difference between eating, let's say, quinoa compared to eating rice, right? There's different sort of carbohydrate loads in these foods. And so if someone has some sort of issue where they're not able to metabolize and break down the sugars, then I would say, why not focus more on sort of the lower carbohydrate foods and have smaller quantities? And that way, you're not cutting out food groups, because I find when people cut out food groups, like someone gets onto like a super low carbohydrate diet, or they're cutting out, let's say, like all grains, or cutting out all fruit, suddenly the cravings start coming in. Suddenly people start binging on things. Suddenly things start falling out of balance. And I find that if you still allow yourself some of these foods, but really watch the quantities and what you're eating, you're more likely to be able to continue with it, as opposed to when someone cuts out too much from their diet. They're able to do it for a certain amount of time, but then they kind of fall off, or they find themselves actually binging on these foods. And we want to kind of avoid the binging. We want you to be able to do something that gets you healthy, gets you towards your health goals, and something you can continue with forever. So I find in general is have your carbohydrates, but if you have some sort of health issue, then just cut down on them, and always make sure it's coming from a whole food source, not processed carbohydrates. That's what you got to be cutting out of your diet. You got to be cutting out the processed food, right? The junk food, the chips, the cookies, that kind of stuff. Things that are made out of flour and refined and processed down foods. That stuff, that's junk. And that's what's messing up people's health. I wouldn't say eating oats or eating quinoa or eating chickpeas. I don't think that's messing up people's health compared to eating the cookies, the candy bars, and the chips. Okay, and a lot of times people are so focused on what health foods they shouldn't and shouldn't be eating, but at the same time they're eating candy bars every day. And I would say focus on the candy bars and getting rid of that. Don't worry so much about the bananas or the white potato, because at least the bananas, the white potato, and anything else that might have a little bit more carbohydrates than other foods, they're also packed with vitamins and minerals and antioxidants and other phytonutrients or other minerals and other just good food, right? It's full of nutrition, as opposed to something that is just empty calories, doesn't have any kind of nutrients. You know, there's nothing in a candy bar, there's nothing in a bag of chips, but just calories and a bunch of refined ingredients. So there's a big difference between the two, and I think too many times people get caught up with what they need to be cutting out of the health food, when really they should be focusing on what they need to just eliminate and say goodbye to out of the junk food. All right, so that's my view of carbohydrates. Enjoy them, you know, but just if you have a health condition, cut down on them, cut down the portions, cut the portions in half. Maybe at some meals you don't have any carbohydrates. You know, maybe you just stick to having carbohydrates instead of 3 times a day, having it twice a day, or maybe even once a day. But don't cut it out completely, because you do need that. You do need it for your fuel. You do need it for your body to function. All right? So that's my tips for today. I'm wishing everyone a super fabulous day, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.